Rain needles the windshield in tight silver stitches, and the wipers lag behind the threadwork as if they're tired of sewing. The lane's mouth is a notch cut into hedged stone, two ruts threading into a green tunnel where daylight dims a shade, and the grill eases toward it like a prow into a narrow lock. A bicycle lamp bobs in that tunnel, one pale bead, then dips behind a blind corner as Siepel Anke Vandenbosch lifts a gloved hand and sweeps forward. Go. Sergeant Elias Ward leans out of the canvas flap, catches the movement, and nods once, committing the nose, claiming inches he cannot return without a geometry he doesn't have. 5 minutes late, and the guns ahead go quiet. A stall here turns their load into a signal, and he spends that inch anyway. The CCKW's gear whine climbs as PFC. Milo Ortega double clutches, heel and toe, trying to find a new rhythm in wet boots, fighting the non-synchro teeth that won't catch if he hurries them. He breathes steam inside the cab. The wheel is big, requires shoulders. He feeds it a quarter turn to shy from a mossed nub of rock fanged out from the bank. Mirrors shave bramble. The lane's average width is a figure in his head, 2.7 meters, and the truck's track eats two of them with nothing banked for pulse or slip. He's never done this with a ton of high explosive and propellant stacked right to left, only training films and flat roads, and the drizzle has turned the hedgerows clay into grease. He keeps the exhaust note steady so Ward doesn't hear fear in it. Behind, Lieutenant Karen Devereaux in the second vehicle checks her watch by instinct, rain ticking its glass like impatient fingernails. She knows dispersion doctrine by heart, 50 to 100 meters in open, 20 in restriction, and the lane narrows her arithmetic whether she consents or not. She throws a hand signal out, palm flat, slow it, keep the interval, keep the cadence. Radios are up but scratchy, an artillery net nearby lacing the air with chatter and bursts of hash that turn orders into coins tossed down a well. She hates guessing, but the timetable is a surrogate god. If they miss the window, the 105s ahead won't punch the night. Anka stands on the pedals and sculls the bicycle around a blind bend, lamp hooded with a thumb to keep the pool small. Her local map is inside her, pre-war pathways sketched in childhood memory, and the land seems the same until it isn't. A new crater yawns where harvest used to be. The verge has slumped 10 centimeters in a place she remembers as firm. She tells herself the lane is just wide enough, because that's what Ward asked, because all width here is approximate, and the banks say yes to your face, while their roots say no under leaves. She rings the bell once to warn of a dog, of owners, of anything that stirs, and in the hedges a shape answers by not moving at all. Water beads and runs on khaki canvas. The truck's nose whispers against the hedge, a secret shared under breath. Ward keeps the glass pane cracked to hear the engine above the rain. He knows what he's carrying, the mass of it, if not the exact count of crates, and feels the weight as a habit of the frame, a reluctance in the springs that says no to sudden. He leans forward without noticing it, as if his chest can pull the truck's bulk through a keyhole by will. He can taste grit kicked up by the front tires, and he maps every protruding stone as a potential wedge. He glances at his men on the running board, their knuckles blanching on the slats, and pushes the thought of a cooking load into a back room locked from the outside. Ortega clips another downshift clean, a small victory and a day short on them, and breathes. The rain is getting heavier, droplets fattening to coins that smack the hood and flatten. The lane has a crown in the center that's mostly gone now, the rut's the only honest path, and he keeps the front axle straddling them like rails. Brakes are a promise he cannot make here. Touch them, and he'll skate. He watches the left mirror for bramble rake and the right for stone teeth, and the wheel wants to come back to center, but the banks insist on the angle. He tucks the thought away that he hasn't practiced reverse on this grade, in this mud, with this much consequence. Devereaux's driver hisses that the net is garbage, the SCR 610 coughing static every time a battery on their side hammers a mission into the sky. She leans forward, fingers pressed to the bakelite like proximity can sweeten the signal, and hears the convoys behind them, the whole machine of relief rattling in rain. Her mind runs a second column parallel to the one in the lane, a column of numbers. Arrival times, propellant loads, fuses, fates. Her flaw doesn't feel like a flaw. The schedule is a lifeline in a storm, and you let go only if the knot around your wrist is cutting through to bone. Anki's lamp disappears around another green corner, hedges braiding overhead until the lane is a throat. She's light, and that lightness lies to her. What carries a bicycle doesn't promise to carry a truck. The verge looks solid because moss knows how to look like ground. The right bank has been gnawed by cattle hooves, the left reinforced by rock only where a farmer cared in a year. That's now a story. She passes a fresh slide, clay slick as a peeled fruit, and files it as a warning she can't translate fast enough, her breath feathering in the cold as she reaches for a memory that will never be hers in wartime. Ward spots the blind corner where hedges meet and decides to shave it on the right. He raises a hand without thinking, crooks 2 fingers for Ortega to nudge, just a little, to avoid scraping the canvas on a briar that hides wire. It's a cautious nudge, a disciplined one, the kind of micro-choice you make to keep the truck intact and morale uncut. The front wheels obey the angle, and the nose clears with a half-inch to spare that feels like genius until the rear duals arrive with their own opinion about weight. Under the rear fender, mud bulges like bread dough under a spoon as the right side dual kisses the verge and then inhales it. The clay had been holding because no one asked it a question until a loaded axle did, and now that the question is weight, the answer is slump. The dual descends the width of a hand, the truck crooks at the hip. Inside, the exhaust coughs as the manifold angle changes. Ortega's foot, fine on feathering, becomes clumsy on load, because in this geometry he has no leverage at all. The truck's forward momentum dies like a thought you can't retrieve mid-sentence. Silence swells in the lane as if someone took the lid off it. The engine grumbles at idle. Rain's metronome keeps time. Ward feels the angle in his spine before he recognizes it in the glass, a tilt that puts his left shoulder higher without drama. And he doesn't want drama, because drama means speed, and there is no speed here. He tells Ortega to hold, not to dig himself a sump with impatient torque, and hears the restraint in his own voice, the officer's calm that is mostly a refusal to move any piece until he sees the whole board. They do not have the board. They have this slice of lane, this bank, this angle. Devereaux's hand comes up in a freezing arc, fingers spread, a halt that means both things. Stop and do not add noise. She hates the word stall, hates what it means in an aircraft, and hates what it means in a column, but she knows it when she sees it. The interval she worked to keep pulls itself thin and then snaps as the second vehicle noses up, in creeping compliance with unseen pressure from behind. She makes the hand signal for engine off, mouths it to the driver, then turns and repeats it down the line, body language puncturing rain, because the net's interference will eat nuance and leave them only with shout and echo if she tries to talk. Anki throws a look back when the lane behind her doesn't hum as it should. The bicycle coasts. She drags a foot for balance in clay that tries to tamp her shoe into it. She's not a soldier, not like them, and the soundscape is her only map with radios unsure. The quiet means stoppage or caution or danger she has no grammar for. She thinks of the lane's junction she scouted earlier, the place where hedges open into a field like a mouth, the kind of coordinate a man with a periscope in math might use if he wanted to hurt a road. She rings the bell once as if sound can make luck, and hears another sound answer that is not wind. The rear of the truck has settled more with every breath, a slow sigh that makes the right rear mudguard feel lower. Ortega keeps his boot steady on the throttle, engine just above stall, knowing that torque, when let loose at once, will do more digging than assisting in wet clay. He tries the reverse slot ritual: clutch, neutral, clutch, throttle, with religious neatness, and the gearbox answers with a complaint. He hasn't practiced this under load. Nobody does until they have to. He pictures a three-point pivot that cannot exist here because the hedgerow banks deny swing radius. The truck is a straight line trapped in a curved problem. Ward glances out and sees it, the hidden knuckle of a hedgerow root ball down at the front left, a knotted planet the color of wet wood just under leaves. The front wheel needs to bite and cut left to unwind the chassis, but the nub says no. It's a physical veto shaped by a century of growth. Ward swallows the taste of copper that hits when risk shows itself. Pull men off and hand load to lighten? He knows the handling protocols, the way ammunition is supposed to be touched, the prohibition against toss. A crate per man per half minute if they form a chain in rain, and the lane walls make chain an elongated bullseye. Behind, the column's breadth shortens. A third vehicle's hood is a monochrome slope, beaded with rain, its driver craning to see around the second, around the first, around the problem that will become his if his radiator kisses the other's tailgate. Devereaux wants to push them back, elastic the line to ease the pressure, but the lane is a French press, walls closing in with crops and rock, and reverse is heresy here because it asks for wheel room none of them have. She slaps a palm down. Stay. Her rigid adherence to timing translates to a rigid architecture. To change it now would be to let the whole scaffolding blow. The rain decides it's not drizzle anymore. It crosses a threshold the lane notices. Water begins to run along the ruts, thin silver rivers that carry grit and oil forward, feeding the puddle at the truck's right rear tire until its surface puckers with nervous energy. The mud suction deepens, a gentle but unyielding hand that has found something it wants to keep. Ortega feathers the clutch again, feels the engine's heat coming up into the cab, the fan throwing warm breath against splattered radiator slats that are losing the fight to a cake of road. Ward calls for pry bars with a calm he's making out of scrap. Men unshoulder them from the running board's kit, slide down into the rut until they're mid-calf in clay, and look for purchase where clay becomes anything else. A bar bites into a stone vein with a sound like a tooth finding a groove. They lean their weight into the steel, boots slipping. This is a 2.5-ton mass loaded with 4,000 pounds of explosive truth, told in crates that cannot be dropped. The truck rocks enough to hint at movement, then returns to its angle with an honesty that breaks into the bones of the men pushing it. Devereaux scans the hedges for the obvious that always comes disguised. Her eyes catch a shape in a break in the leaves, a rectangle of something like field glass winking into the lane, then gone. She loves numbers because they are indifferent to mood and hate. She recognizes the arithmetic of their vulnerability the second she counts the seconds between Ortega's throttle pulses and imagines them carried to a spotter's ear. She lifts her hand to cut the engines completely, to take their breath away, to make the lane, for one narrow piece of time, uninteresting to ears beyond it. Anki plants a foot and peers through a hedge gap where barbed wire and wild rose wrestle. Across a sodden field, a stump that may be a man shifts by not shifting, monotony interrupted by calculus. A silhouette smudges against a stand of black beech, no uniform discernible in this light, only the geometry of watchfulness. She can't see the mortar. She doesn't need to. She thinks of what she told Ward, just wide enough, and the childish trust in that phrase curdles in her mouth. She rings the bell again because she has no other signal at range and hates herself for its tinny hope. The truck's engine idles lower as Ortega tries to spare heat. The choke of the lane feeds exhaust back through the canvas, an animal breath that makes the men blink. Ward smears rain and fog with a glove and sees the second vehicle's driver staring at him with a question that knows the answer and hates it. The briefest thought flickers. Spool up now, risk digging, gain speed while they still can. And he rejects it because geometry and mud don't care about urgency, only force vectors and limits. He taps 2 fingers to his eyes and then the hedge. Watch, because what moved earlier wasn't wind. In the smear of rain, Devereaux's hand freezes mid-signal, something like a premonition making the air around her denser. She thinks of the battery's gun crews on their clock without shells, the way they'll husband their last rounds and curse the darkness as a strategic player. She thinks of the doctrine that says, keep dispersion unless terrain says no, and terrain always speaks final here. She points to the men in the rut, then up, then makes the open-handed throat-cut gesture. Kill the engines now. Silence is their garment, their only camouflage left, because if the lane's rhythm has been counted from afar, every RPM is a bead on an abacus. Anka steadies the bicycle with one hand and the hedge with the other, thorns pricking through glove, each sting a bespoke alertness. She sees the fog of exhaust hanging in the lane like a halo that can be sighted on at distance, the way light bleeds into mist and draws eyes the way a candle draws moths. She wants to wave them out, back, anywhere but here, but there is no room for the wave to mean anything. She hears it then, the first thin whistle of something that belongs to math more than malice, a pencil line dropped from sky to ground to test an equation. Ward's jaw tightens. He does not call out. He claps his palm twice, gets eyes, and then lowers his hand flat as if to calm a horse. Down. Quiet. Ortega's hand moves to the ignition. The CCKW shudders and falls silent, the lane sighing into a new shape of sound. Rain again. Breathing. The metallic tick of a hot engine cooling a degree in air. Somewhere, ahead or to the right, a cut of hedge holds its breath with them, and the noise becomes all absence, a stage waiting for a first line. The spot where the rear dual bit deeper burps once, a wet release. The mortar round lands short, a thud beyond the lane's mouth that doesn't belong to the lane. Earth coughs and dirt arcs. Leaves ripple with the percussive breeze, then settle like reprimanded children. Devereaux measures the distance by reflex and doesn't like what the math suggests, someone with a workable bracket and patience. She wants to tell them to move forward, to get out from under the pre-cited guess that will become a certainty. But forward is a joke told by people with room. She holds her hand ready to chop the air, ready to draw shut every throat valve they own. The truck answers the wheel like a body with a pinned shoulder. Stubborn, limited, compromised. Ortega tries to bleed a leftward cut into the front end with the smallest motions he has, hands light, even as fear quarries a place behind his sternum. The root ball laughs under the fender with a woody patience. He could jack the front. He could, if there were time, if there were not air designed to be corrective coming for this coordinate. He looks at Ward without moving his head and sees in his sergeant's eyes the same geometry drawn clean and cold. Rain thickens into a sheet that closes the lane's depth of field to a few truck lengths, and in that privacy, the second vehicle's radiator does not kiss the first's tailgate by a grace Devereaux despises, even as she blesses it. She wants to stagger the column laterally to complicate a bracket, to make their profile ragged, but hedges shear them into a single, perfect line. She raises her hand one more time, the chop forming, a silent edict that will save seconds they cannot afford to spend to noise, and then the lane itself whispers a line from the hedge that answers none of it in a human tongue, a whisper that is an intake of breath before speech. The rear wheel slurps off the verge another inch, a wet mouth that refuses to let go, and the truck's spine kinks further, imperceptibly to a passerby, shocking to the men hanging on it. The steering wheel goes soft under Ortega's hands as the load shifts a degree he cannot counter with leverage he does not have. Somewhere dead ahead, something in the hedgerow moves against the rule of wind, stiff with intention rather than breeze. The truck won't answer. The lane is about to. Hold its breath. A thin descending whistle threads the drizzle, a sewing needle through wet canvas, and then a thud in the meadow beyond throws mud against the hedge like a handful of gravel. Lieutenant Devereux is out of her cab before the spatter falls back, palm up, chopping motion, the universal cut-it-all gesture. Engines cough to silence one by one, reluctant, ticking hot in the cold air. The absence of their growl reveals smaller sounds, the huff of men, the drip-drip from leaves, a bicycle's faint chain rattles somewhere ahead where the hedge turns. The column, deprived of the sound cue that keeps distance, squeezes inward despite her. Each truck noses up to the next tailboard, and the doctrine of dispersion collapses into the geometry of a barrel. If timing gave away a route, stillness now paints a perfect bracket. Hand signals only. She rakes 2 fingers down to show eyes, then stabs toward the ditch where the rear duals of the lead GMC are swallowed up to their hubcap by a wet clay verge that's slumped another thumb's width since the last breath. Sergeant Elias Ward, shoulders hunched under his field jacket, points to PFC. Milo Ortega and mimes the clutch and stick. Feather, don't dump. Ortega nods, jaw clenched, and reaches to turn the key back to accessory, but Devereux scythes her hand again. No ignition, no plume. The first puff of exhaust was seen by someone other than them. They have to move a truck that weighs 2.5 tons before cargo without the one thing it needs. The lane, 2.7 meters cheekbone to cheekbone, offers no swing, no pivot, just the ache of straight ahead, through mud that is trying to eat steel. Pry bars appear like swords in a low-budget play. Long iron cheaters hauled off the second truck's running boards and the engineer's jeep mid-column. Men wedge them under the outer dual between tire and the clay that bulges up like rising dough, shiny as liver. They throw shoulders and breath at it. The tire flexes, then the bar jumps, and with it a man. He smacks the bank and slides, his boots cutting grooves in moss. Each shove deepens the rut's lip, and the rear axle sinks a thumb deeper. The truck now leans into the bank, the mirrors chrome kissing thorn. Wood crates in the bed creak as the load shifts, 4,000 pounds of 105 mm HE and propellant canisters that have their own rules, their own handling tempo. Hand to hand, never dropped, each one a half-minute of careful impatience they do not have while someone walks their range. Across the hedged fields where the lane disappears into mist, a man with binoculars steps close to a low stone wall and counts in his head. HPTM. Rolf Neumann has nothing like abundance. Few tubes, fewer rounds, but he has a bracket that aligns with a crossroads and a human metronome. He saw the bicycle lamp bob and wink, then a cloud of white vapor drifting above the hedge, exhaust in cold drizzle. The first round was short by a fence line. He cranks elevation with 2 fingers and opens his other hand flat. Wait for the sound to carry. He can't see the trucks, but he can count seconds between when an engine revs hard under strain and when that sound reaches his ears through wet air. The cadence of impatience gives him the distance he needs. If they stop making noise, he has to make them move. Devereux counts different things: men, bars, the droop of an axle, the color of the mud, the way rain loads the leaves until the hedge becomes a curtain. Her radio hisses weakly on her chest, an SCR 610 netting static with someone else's artillery fire, a larger mission somewhere to the south smearing their frequencies. She tries to push through with brevity. Ward, status? But the words dissolve in a wash of splatter and code names that are not theirs. She waves the handset at the sky as if altitude will fix it, and then tucks it back under her poncho, more weight on her shoulders. The column is deaf. Orders will travel only as fast as a runner can do in mud and shrapnel, which is to say, slower than fear and faster than good sense. They try to make the truck lighter without breaking rules. Ward pulls the bed tarp back and the rain sails in. A crate the size of a suitcase is slid to the tailgate, grips taken, breath drawn. A man intones the SOP like a warding charm. Don't drop it, don't tip it, don't jostle. They pass it down like a pallbearer team, 30 seconds of careful for each 40 pounds of explosive. And after 4 crates, the clock they do not choose to obey ticks louder than the drizzle. Ortega's eyes never leave the front wheels, which are pinched so tight by the hedge's root ball, the fat-knuckled fist of a pre-war hawthorn, that he cannot get the cut he needs to pull the chassis straight. He works the steering inside that immovable geometry, hands palming a wheel that twitches but does not turn the situation. The drizzle builds into honest rain. Devereux feels it as weight, as time, as the slick that steals purchase. She points 2 men under the bed with rocks, boards scavenged from a fence rail, anything to build a track. The mud laughs. It holds the boards like a magician palms a coin, and then, when the men heave, belches them out sideways like a joke. The lane's banks are tall enough that air is a tunnel, water a steady sheet, and every face is streaked in clay until they all look related. Far down the column, a driver restarts against orders, fear, not malice, and the cough of his engine goes up like a flare. Newman turns his hand the thickness of 2 coins and murmurs to his calc. 1 mil down, 3 left for the wind that he feels as a soft brush on his ear. He watches the hedgerows top as if it were a heartbeat line. When raindrops are shredded mid-air like whispered paper, he knows the previous burst was close to his elevation. His men load with practiced economy. The 8-meter mortar tube shivers, the round leaves with a plunk, and climbs into weather and time. He does not look at the tube. He watches only the hedge, the breathing black ribbon that holds secrets. The second whistle is thinner. It arrives with the poignancy of music and the cruelty of punctuation, and then the sky above the lane ruptures. The round air bursts clean over them, fuse set to command detonate, and the canopy becomes 1,000 knives. Leaves turn to confetti with a hiss. Twigs snap, the rain starts falling green. A spray of shrapnel coughs into the clay bank inches over Ortega's shoulder, freckling his cheek with cool wet and warm wet both. Devereux flinches, but her hand keeps signaling. The cut across the throat for engines stays, the palm down for low stays, the stab forward for push, push, push stays. Her jaw works. She has to choose between the rule of keeping the column alive by dispersion and the reality of this geometry that cannot accommodate it. She decides to spend bodies against minutes. Ward swallows a metallic taste and goes to the radiator, which fans a lukewarm breath now. The truck has been at low idle too long, mud splatter cake lowering what little airflow the cold wet could offer. He slides a glove across the grill, and it comes away black and gritty. The engine smells hot and exhausted. If they try to feather the clutch now, without movement, they risk stall, and restarting under load will make the next attempt worse. He makes a calculation nobody sees. Better a single risk under control than a series of failures that multiply morale. He yells, though he knows Devereux ordered silence, and the sound is a flat plate in the wet air. On my count, we take it. PFC. Ortega hesitates. The gearbox in his left hand is old school, non-synchro, the thing you respect like a stubborn animal. Double clutch down from second to first is easy enough when you have movement and a hill's help. Now, under load with 1,000 tiny variables, it is a ritual. He toes the clutch, slides to neutral, lets it up, blips the throttle so the gear's ghosts meet in the middle, toes down, slides toward first, and feels the teeth ask him a question. If he gets it wrong, the engine coughs and dies, and the backwash of panic will be a smell you can taste. He looks at Ward's fingers counting in the rain. He lets the clutch out, almost nothing, just the whisper of a kiss, and it is like stepping onto a floor that is not there. The rear duals spin. Mud surges up and over the treads like bread dough breaking its pan. The right-hand verge visibly slumps, just a breath, and the axle tilts another degree. If you could take a carpenter's level to the truck, you would see a bubble that is no longer centered. The men can feel it in their knees. Someone at the tailgate mutters saint names and then swallows the rest of the prayer as a shard of a branch whacks his helmet and leaves a dent. The pry bar under the tire spits out like a harpoon and skitters down the lane, ringing like a spoon. Every attempt to create friction instead polishes the clay to a shine and deepens the sump the tire is digging. Each spin locks the differential into a lie. It thinks both tires have traction, but torque chooses whichever side lies most sweetly. 2 trucks back, a corporal holds up a thermite grenade he pulled from the engineer's kit and looks at it as if it were future and past both. He doesn't say anything. Devereaux sees him and shakes her head, a sharp more time. Even under the hedge's rain, the implied heat of that decision warms the lane. The ammunition bed hums in its own silence. Each crate is fine if fine means it does not get knocked or cracked, if fine means the wooden slats that keep brass cozy do not warp under water. Rain to water to steam is a path you do not want inside a load of things designed to turn pressure into distance. She pushes her palm out flat. Keep passing. 1 crate, 2, rhythm like a metronome tapped on brass casings. In the field beyond, Neumann hears the music he needs. Not engines now, but the changes in voices that reach him out of the mist. Not words, just the hunch of syllables, the difference between orders and panic. He sets his next rounds for airburst by feel, thumb and forefinger ensuring the fuse collars bite, and hands them down. His men are wet and quiet, hands red and clean from handling steel under rain. He marks time with his index finger on the stone wall, slow enough not to outrun his math. The Meuse-Ourthe corridor he was told to delay is a line on a paper map. Here it is a lane where geometry and fear intersect on his terms. The 3rd round comes in sounding like the 2nd, which is to say, ordained, but falls slightly behind the truck, bracket rocking forward now with purpose. Shrapnel strafes the lane's mouth where the bicycle had bobbed minutes before. Seapoel Anke Vandenbosch wrenches her handlebars in a reflex from a childhood ditch and spills into nettles, a flash of blue scarf swallowed in green. She is alive, she thinks, and then the lane is a bell and she is the clapper, and when she pushes up, her hands come away with stinging nettle barbs and the taste of iron. She cannot see the column for the hedge, but she can see the line of mist rising from behind it like breath. She retrieves her bicycle, 1 tire squeaking now, and wonders whether her bell earlier was the first tell. At the nose of the GMC, the bumper has a new intimacy with the opposite bank. Ward sees paint scrape off in curls, sees bark from the hedge root buckle under steel, and knows that the option of jackknifing the front to pull the rear back into line has moved from improbable to impossible. No forward, no reverse, not without moving sideways, and sideways is a direction the lane does not provide. He points at the bank, mimes digging, but the root ball under the leaves is not dirt. It is muscle. Someone stabs at it with an entrenching tool, and the edge bounces, folding a tooth. The bank is now an accomplice, not terrain. Noise arrives from too many directions. The radio on Devereaux's chest hisses into a voice shaped like their net call sign, or close enough to make her risk a reply. Roadblock at grid, and then a spray of code that might be weather or might be a battery telling someone else to lift 300 meters. She presses the transmit, and her voice steps out into a crowd, and she realizes that she has become too valuable standing here. If a fragment finds her, it takes the entire plan with it. She taps the runner on the shoulder, points to the rear, and shoves a scribbled note into his hand with 3 numbers on it. Distance, timing, miracle. A truck 4 back creeps. The driver thinks inches are his only money and spends them, easing forward until his bumper kisses the tailgate in front. The lane amplifies that decision. It sends the nudge down the column like a whisper. Men feel it as a heel pushed forward, a hand at their back, a pressure of trucks become train cars with no locomotive. Somewhere in that compression, a box slips, and then another pair of hands catches it before gravity does. The SOP survives by a grunt and a curse. And in the lead, Ortega feels the push as a weight, as if the road itself has decided they belong deeper. Neumann's next command is not a word, but a tapping sequence. The charges are corrected for what he thinks is their correction of him. He has spent his youth on tables and angles. Now weather and human choice conspire in his favor. He tips his chin into rain and tastes coal. The limestone in the wall leaches into his cuffs. He will remember the grit, as detail later, if he lives to have a later. He has gambled that a supply timetable is a firing solution, that trucks moving at 20 meters apart in restricted terrain will create a beat he can dance to. They have stopped, he thinks, but they cannot stay stopped. He will nudge them into movement or into noise. Ward's count reaches down into men's guts. 3 fingers. 2. Ortega blips the throttle to bring the gear into the same song as the engine. The pedal is slick, and his boot sole slips a hair. He recovers it because he has to, because a millimeter will be the difference between an easy slide and a teeth chatter. He breathes once, hard, and lets the clutch up smoother than he has in his life. The truck shudders, rises a whisper out of its rut, and the universe hangs on a hinge. Then the slick root ball under the right front wheel yields by a thumb's width, and the nose dips. The bumper fuses into the bank, the whole machine wedged now, not just stuck. They do not have forward. They do not have reverse. Geometry has turned their choices into a sum with one answer. The air overheats without permission. Men take shallow breaths. The rain is heavier now. It makes halos on helmets. It smooths the bank into a mirror where you can watch your own failure. Deborah's face is rain-polished, focus sharp. She taps Ward's chest with knuckles, hard once. Offload. Protocol. It is insane, and it is the only sane thing. He nods, already reaching back, passing the next crate down the chain. Each box slides and stops and slides and stops in hands that are becoming claws. The crate wood swells. Lids refuse to fit back on their pins. Brass gleams like a mocking smile, rain stippling it in a rhythm he cannot unhear. A fragment of something hot and sharp scythes in and turns a corner of the tarp into smoke. Someone pats it with a bare hand and dances backward, shaking fingers. The smell of singed canvas and wet explosives is a new thing that will not leave the nose in this lifetime. Over the hedge, the mortar's bark is soft, but the air answers hard. An explosion whoops much closer this time, so close that ears misregister it as the sound of pressure changing and mouths go cotton. A spray of leaf pulp slaps the men like thrown salad. A driver further back begins to sob, quietly, as if he could hide the sound from sound itself. Vandenbosch, nettle-stung and guilty, tugs her bicycle into the gap where the lane spills into a field path. She lifts her head to call something that will fix anything, and her voice sticks on her teeth because the second airburst has shaved the hedge down a whole hand. And through that window she sees the column's immobility as a sin. She sets the bicycle down, gentle as if it were a child, and runs forward along the hedge, her boots making almost no noise in wet grass. She has learned the shapes of craters since last week, and she knows you can love a road wrong. Time stutters. The next mortar whisper is the meanest one yet, because after it comes the hiss of leaves being sliced into lace, and under that hiss, someone in the chain shouts the thing that has been scratching the back of every skull since the first wheel slurped off the verge. We dump the load, or we die here. Deborah's mouth shapes no, because protocols are a rope you hold when the ground goes to slurry, but her eyes flick to the slick black rectangles stenciled he, and the thought she won't voice, what happens if a fragment kisses one, outpaces doctrine. Ward hears the shout, hears the murmuring answering it, and calculates the weight of crates to the second, hand to hand, 25 seconds when you're doing it right, 40 when you're doing it scared. 12 men if the men stay upright. 12 men, 3 tons down the lane, a lane that's narrowing by the minute as both banks slump, and a mortar team riding their error like a bridle. Ortega's knuckles go white on the wheel, the engine idling low enough to shutter the hood badge, steam feathering off the radiator fins where mud has tiled itself and now holds heat like a stove. He tries to baby the throttle to keep the battery charged without revving high enough to cast a plume, a thing the forward observer across the field is timing with his thumb and 2 fingers. The rain builds from prick to pins, the glass fogs at the edges where the wiper doesn't sweep, and Ortega says nothing because his tongue would tangle. He just fishes for the feel of friction in his left boot and knows if he misses a downshift again. In this trench, the stall will be the last quiet choice they make. A bell tinks somewhere ahead, a stupid little civilian sound, Vanden Bosch's bicycle edging back into view. A position change that tells a lie about freedom of movement. She is panting, mud to her knees, eyes blown wide. "The verge is gone 20 meters up," she hisses, like there's a quieter way to deliver bad news under rain, and flicks her lamp, which is nothing to them now except a glow that draws line of sight. Her pre-war map in her head says track where there is no track now, her finger jabbing at the hedge where there's sapling growth thickening a corner. No one can swing through. She gestures 3 points with her hand, the necessary geometry, and her wrist trembles because the hedge removes the angle they need, and the Germans, if they're clever, are counting on that exact subtraction. Ward makes the call he hoped to never make on a road he chose too confidently. Offload enough to lighten, but do it by the book. No drop, pass only, and only the forward half of the bed so the rear axle can climb if it ever finds bite. The men move before the words finish because bodies remember survival faster than brains remember policy. Fingers dig under the lip of a crate. They heft and half walk, half slide it along the scraping tailgate to waiting hands. The rain sheeted so fierce now, each lid goes black with it, and the brass visible under a splintered slat gleams like a lie about durability. A crate slips, snatched by 2 men who will swear later the wood would have cracked if they were a second slower. They will not mention the way the round inside kissed the edge of its partition. Over the hedges, Neumann hears the new cadence, the gap between revs stretched by seconds of passing, and does the smallest thing with his wrist that can mean lives. He shifts from impact fuses to time, 1 twist, 1 detent, and tells his loader, Baumkronen, tree crowns. The loader grimaces because air bursts over wet leaves feel like rain hitting you from inside your clothes, and if they get the cut too low, the fragments skip and ricochet like hornets. They have numbers scribbled in pencil on the back of a ration box, distance to the lane junction, the difference wind and wet make today, and Neumann lets the drizzle blur the pencil to make sure he doesn't trust it too much. The next 2 rounds open the lane like an umbrella from hell. Detonations above head height, leaves flayed into confetti, green snow sluicing down, the lane filling with botanical smoke that stings the eyes worse than powder. Men flinch and duck and keep their hands where the crates will be, because stopping is a way to die, and moving is the other way, but at least you can pick. Devereux gets hit high and shallow on the shoulder by a fragment that spent itself on hedge first. She doesn't look because looking is 1 more second of not counting, and counting is how she stills the panic. 20 meters spacing in theory, now pressed to 10 in practice, the whole column telescoping until the second truck's bumper sulks at the first's tailgate like a couple at the rope of a foxtrot. They don't want to dance. Ortega tries the trick every farmhand learns with a stuck wagon. Rock it, forward and back, take the slack in the mud like a breath, and exhale it into motion. He lifts clutch a hair, finds engagement, feels the chassis lean into the root ball hidden under the leaf litter, a snag under the left front that is as effective as a chain to a fixed post. The rear duels, their treads already slicked with a rind of clay, spin out their last honest effort and then make a decision without him. They dig. Mud bulges up around them like bread dough pushing through a mesh, and suddenly the hub is near to kissing the earth, and the angle of the truck increases by a degree that means nothing to anyone but a gearbox and a man with his fingers freezing out on the stick. Ward watches the angle with the eye of a carpenter, a man who knows plumb and knows when a vertical is trying to become a slope. The bed leans just enough that the crates want to slide, and he hears the little shuffle of wood on wood, a sound like teeth. He wants to order ropes, wedges, anything, but protocols and reality clash. Those lashings are to keep everything from moving, and now they need everything to move off, and there is no quick way to temporarily secure and then unsecure under falling metal. He thinks absurdly of the diagram in the manual, arrows showing the correct way to load, and hates the flat calm of a drawing that doesn't bleed in the margins. Radios scratch nonsense. Artillery farther north is talking all over their net. Of fire missions clip numerals slapping into their channel. And when WWII presses the transmit, she hears their own call sign eaten and burped back to her as if underwater. She wants to call abort, wants to say reverse and scatter and damn the junction choke point. But the words stall in static, and the hammering of another time-fused shell breaks the thought. She switches to hand again, bold shapes in the air, offload 2 more, then attempt a jackknife into the bank to get the nose pointing out. It's madness, but it's also geometry, and geometry doesn't care about cowardice. They clear the forward quarter of the bed, enough that Ortega feels the front end rise a whisper and hates the way hope injects itself. WWII leans at the bumper like she can bend metal by will. Ward places men, 6 on the right to push, 4 on the left to keep the lean from rolling into a topple. Ortega pops it into first, ghosts the clutch, and turns the wheel hard. The front tire kisses the opposite bank, then bites, with the hedge root bringing its own opinion, and the bumper finds a seam in the earth and wedges itself like a doorstop. It sounds ridiculous when it stops, a single bone knocking and then silence under rain, the whole mass held by the absurdity of a misjudged inch. Neumann can't see the wedged bumper, but he can see the exhaust no longer ballooning out the same way in the mist. He hears, in the way sound crawls along hedges, the difference between a truck trying and a truck trapped, and he knows that's better. An immobilized target takes adjustment out of the equation. You can park the bracket and spend on air fuse economy. He orders a 2-round quick, 5 meters apart, both timed a hair low, a kill ceiling for men bent to lifting. He feels the ugliness of it, but notes it anyway. You make your mortar into a metronome, and their work becomes the beat. A splinter of crate takes a gouge off Ortega's cheek as another lift goes wrong. He tastes copper and cedar in his mouth and keeps his hand on the stick. He whispers, for no one to hear, for the engine to forgive him, to stay cool, to not boil over when he'll need every drop power to step over the rut. The needle on the temp gauge is crawling up, a snail on a wet wall. Mud has plated the radiator face until the fan is moving air through a clogged lung. He slaps the hood once, uselessly, as if he can shock it clear. He decides. When the push comes, he'll bring the revs up, draw the chance in even if it draws attention, because a quiet engine is only a virtue if silence isn't getting you killed. WWII stares at the crates still on the bed, does the math again, knows the SOP about explosives in rain and handling, and the fact that everything about this is a compromise. "We can't lighten enough fast enough," she says to Ward, and he nods because agreeing is easier than explaining why disagreeing won't change gravity. She pulls the small heavy thing from her pocket, the thing she carries and hopes to never love. A thermite grenade in its straitjacket of tape, pinned through. She says, "Not yet," and doesn't commit to the words, because there's another calculus running that doesn't care what she wants. If they have to fire the bed, There are men close enough now that a spark becomes everyone's problem. Vandenbosch is back beside the hedgerow, one hand on her bicycle, ticket to everywhere for a town girl who never wanted steel and propellant as her vocabulary. She presses her hand into the bank, and it gives, 6 centimeters in, water sloshing up between her fingers like the lane is drinking her. She curses in Flemish the way her grandmother did when the bread collapsed in the oven, a small domestic echo in a field that has organized itself for slaughter. The bank is moving, she says, because the world itself is shifting under them, an unnoted enemy. She tries to wedge a flat rock under the rear dual, and the rock disappears like a coin in a pocket, and she knows the word suction without needing the book of it. Another air burst detonates, and the sound makes a choice. It goes up and down into the lane instead of out into the field. The hedges are acting as an acoustic box, the fragments pinging off branches and doubling back at knee height. A man screams because a shard has traced a line from his calf to his boot, not deep, but the scream is a signal Neumann hears and marks. Range correct, fusing correct. He lowers nothing. He watches the drift of smoke and notes wind shift slight left, half a degree, enough to call. He doesn't have many rounds. He cannot waste praise on accuracy. He spends it on the next fix. Ward takes that scream too and folds it into his order. 2 more off and then we try with ropes, he says, and the ropes are wishful thinking turned into action. Bed slung, wheel cowling wrapped to let 8 men pull where driveline torque won't. They're improvised, quick knots and hands that will burn, because a rope doesn't care what it is to be hastily used. It cares about angle and grip. The men put shoulders into the side panel and press, and their boots slide and pick up crescents of clay that go with them like gilt. The truck doesn't move. A sound comes out of the rear axle, old man and complaining, like a bone that has been carrying too much for too long. Devereux's jaw tightens, and the decision she has been holding like a live wire burns through her glove. "Sergeant," she says, making Ward look at her. Not the stuck, not the men, not the idea of a battery waiting for shells by nightfall. "If we can't move in 60 seconds, we make sure the Germans don't get 4,000 pounds of help." Ward's first reflex is to spit no, because his name will be attached to a thing that breaks, but he measures 60 seconds in mortar rounds. At this cadence, 2 more airbursts, maybe 3, and thinks about what happens to brass when heated by thermite, frictionless downward slope to useless. He thinks of the battery. He thinks of the men. He nods and hates it because the nod makes a path between his spine and a ruin he chose. Ortega finds a tongue he thought the Germans had taken. "Give me everything on 3, he says, and it is as earnest a prayer as he knows. 3 becomes a grunt, and the men haul and push, and the engine leaps as he gives it fuel. The exhaust coughs a big sleeve of smoke into the lane that would be a gift to anyone with glass and a grid square, and the front tire shears a fan of wet hedge as it saws against the bank, and for a moment the sound is everything: whining gear, groaning wood, men's boots grinding, rain hissing on hot metal. The truck shifts half an inch, then the opposite bank answers with a simple mechanical truth. It pushes back with earth, and that half-inch becomes the wrong kind of motion as the bumper lodges deeper. The rear duals chuff and then whine and then spin in a way that tells every ear here exactly what they are. Fixed. The mud that had the courtesy to be a surface becomes a trough, and the trench it creates has walls, and those walls collapse in sloppy stratigraphy that looks like cakes cut in cross-section. The hub is now touching noise, and Ortega feels it through the wheel. The way vibration runs a sleeve up his bones. "She's not going," he says, and the sentence is in the simple past because the present is full of fragments. Neumann takes the loader's wrist when the man reaches for another air fuse because he is cautious with pattern and doesn't want to give Cadence an easy plot. He drops one impact short and watches the world react, the way heads rise out of instinct when the whistle ends too far away. He sees a figure move toward the underside of the truck bed with a grenade, the wrong shape to be an explosion meant for other men. He doesn't smile. He marks it. He raises his sights a hair to drop the next one where the decision-maker is walking, not because he wants to cut ahead so much as because he wants to keep the idea of choice as expensive as possible. Rain saturates into everything until the lane feels like a throat. They are inside an organ that is swallowing this problem on its own schedule. WWII pulls the pin. It's almost quiet, the neat practice motion she hates herself for making well, because training likes to show up in moments when you'd rather feel like a person. Back, she says, and the men closest fall away like a tide. Ward bends under the bed where the cross-bracing will take a fuse's bite, and he hesitates long enough to hate the way the hesitation feels like cowardice and like consideration both. He lodges the thermite against the steel where it will eat greedily. Ortega sees the grenadier's game in miniature. He wants to save the truck, but the truck is now a geometry of bad decisions and inches and two stubborn banks. He wants to keep the shells, but their weight is a trap, their value, an invitation to more rounds. He wants to keep his hands clean and his soul unburdened, but his palms are already mud and his breath is already smoke. He hears the tiny spit of the thermite fuse, catching like a match in bad weather, and he knows that's a timer none of them set, but all of them answered. Another round thunks somewhere off to the side, a miscalc born of the wind shift Neumann already corrected for. The lane spared for 15 seconds, that feel like forgiveness. The grenade starts to hiss, that steady snake sound that says iron is about to become orange water. Vanden Bosch, whose bike chain has started making the same sound, backs away, one hand on her saddle and the other covering the crucifix under her collar like she can silence one with the other. She thinks, irrationally and therefore truthfully, of the day she learned to ride in this country, on a dry lane, in a summer where there were only bees and the distances to learn. WWII meets Ward's eye. There's no poetry in it. There isn't time. When it goes, we're out and we cover the ditches, she says. We leave the rest for rain. Ward nods again, a man who has decided to be a wedge in his own way, to make a shape in the flow that others can use to slip past. He thinks of the battery, again, but the thought is no longer a compass point. It is a location on a map that this lane no longer reaches. He starts to count, not shells or seconds, but men. Neumann adjusts nothing for the next drop. He has his lane. He slides the reticle just enough to paint the middle of where a column squeezed itself to 20 meters. He hears, faint as an insect, the sound a fuse makes up close. A hiss he can't possibly hear from this range, but that his memory fills in. He thinks of the men in the ditch as numbers on the ration box. He orders fire. He does not look away from the glass. The thermite goes white. It doesn't explode. It performs. Liquid iron begins to chew a hole in a floor that was supposed to hold. Steam jets where rain tries to disagree and fails. The men who helped slide the last crate off feel heat on their shins like a stove door opened in a small kitchen, and they step back because stepping forward would make no sense, not even for the stubborn. Ortega grabs a glove he doesn't remember dropping and holds it over his face because there is something childlike about it, and because there is smoke now that is not the lanes and not the Germans, and it will not be kind. The clatter that comes next is familiar only because men make the same sound across wars when they have chosen to burn their own machines, a chorus of realization, of things leaving the realm of recovery. WWII screams, "Down," because she wants them flatter than the road and knows the next bracket is already in the air. Wards drags a man by the suspenders into the ditch and covers his head like he can hold him in place against gravity and steel. Vanden Bosch pushes her bicycle into the hedge and crowds in after it like something that cheap and civilian can be a talisman. The air splits again, timed perfect for men who think they can beat a hiss. Fragments shear fresh leaves and then chew into mud where their faces would have been a heartbeat later. Shrapnel taps the truck's bed like rain asking admission to a house. Thermite drips through steel in bright orange threads, dropping into the shadow undercarriage in a way that would be close to beautiful if it didn't smell like a foundry in hell. Ortega feels the urge to reach in and save certain things: a lucky wrench, a photograph in the glove box he may never look at, a ring. He sits on his hands instead because some orders you give yourself are the ones that keep everyone else alive. The engine coughs once more like it wants to be part of any choice, any action, and then, like a good soldier, it accepts silence. In the sudden quiet between hisses and whistles, he thinks he hears the battery far off, a sound carried by a trick of weather, and knows it's imagination. He lets it be a comfort anyway. Neumann notes the new smoke's color in the sight, white and then orange, and understands. He sets his jaw and shifts his attention to the tail of the column, because men running from a burning thing have habits, and those habits can be read. He is down to a handful of rounds. He does not know if any of this changes anything decisive, but he knows a convoy that doesn't move is a better story for him than one that slips by into night. He orders one more on the junction, just from habit, to keep the memory of a choke point honest. The last guns in the column, the only ones that aren't blocked by the lane's geometry, crack open their little world. A half-track's horn barks the retreat code, and its machine gun gives a sheet of noise toward Neumann's field, not to hit, but to smear the senses. The noise folds back under rain, and the walls of the lane make a tunnel for sonic violence. Devereaux uses it, rides the roar, and sets 3 men at intervals to shepherd small knots around the smoking truck. Ward, looking younger where the steam silvered his stubble, points to Ortega and jerks his thumb twice. Out now, and the driver obeys, finally letting go of the wheel like the release of a held breath. He hits the mud and his legs fail to find purchase. Hands haul him up. The truck, relieved of the nagging human insistence of control, settles another centimeter into the suck and hisses in a register that isn't mechanical. The thermite has bitten frame, sparks arc, captured for a moment in rain beads before they blink into smoke. A whistle from the right that isn't a mortar draws a few heads. Anka, who has reclaimed her bicycle as if a talisman, brings it down against the bank at the lower gap and points with the front wheel like a bayonet. She has found a footpath, the kind that exists in no military map, a byre track worn by milk cows. 2 ruts lead into hedged shadow. There, she mouths, and the forward squad takes it, a slit uncalibrated by any bracket. The convoy becomes a string of desperate ideograms, men in pairs and threes, vectoring off through openings no wider than shoulders. Weight drops in increments, the math of survival is subtraction, and the line that had made them a target dissolves into a smear. Devereaux counts groups as if counting beats. She thinks of the timetable she slept with in her breast pocket, a paper anchor, and understands too late that the schedule was a firing solution for someone else. She pockets the paper as if hiding it can change its meaning. Neumann loses them moment by moment, smoke the wrong color for his wind, drift wrong, his tube numbers out of balance, then a sullen wash of light from the truck rolling into proper flame. He lowers his binoculars, hands numb not from cold, but from the come-down of the tension he has been holding. His men look at him for what's next. He tells them to hold and listen, and under the rain they hear the change. Engines glutting, then thinning, then done. For an instant, a hard outcome looms, the shells cooking off in one roar, but the world is more stubborn. Thermite eats through bed and driveshaft, the truck kneels into itself, and the ammunition sits and steams, intact in its wet wood. The fire becomes a rectangle of orange that marks the lane from a kilometer away. It is enough. In the hedgerow's lee, Ortega keeps time by breath and joints, following Devereaux's silhouette as she points them from cover to cover, her face a streaked slate with a single bright smear where shrapnel has nicked her temple. Ward is last by design, hovering at the edge of the fire, counting through his mental roster and coping with the ugly knowledge of the two he can't see. He leaves when the heat front tells his skin what duty cannot argue. Go. Rain does its slow, impartial work, tamping the fire's edges even as the center burns white and then dulls. The lane ambient returns one notch at a time, drizzles drum on puddles, cows lowing trashy from shock in a near pasture, the tick of cooling metal swallowed by running water. Neumann's team folds the tube, 2 men to a pole, and backs off into the hedges. They have rounds enough for a skirmish and not enough for a second performance. Their orders breathe beside them like beasts they can't fully control. Night makes claim without moon. It is the texture of wet wool drawn over the eyes. Goggles are useless now, so men stink-eye their world and move by touch. Anki leads with the animal sense of someone who grew here, reading a watercourse by sound and hedge by smell. There are 2 turnings she has never taken, and takes anyway, because behind them the thing in the lane is still burning, marking the geography of error, a lighthouse of the wrong kind. By the time they hit the farm lane that meets the main road, the rain has fallen from needle to thread. The column is now just a collection of survivors shepherding their breath and their private violences. WWII counts again and settles for the number that nods back. Ward leans on a gatepost and retches, then wipes his mouth with a hand that will never be clean. Ortega sits on his heels and looks at his palms open like he expects to see the outline of the wheel burned there. Neumann, walking with his men in the grape of hedgerow shadow, says nothing. He pauses at the last hedge break, listens for engines that do not return, and then turns them downslope by gesture alone. The wall holds a wet handprint when he leaves it. They move. At first light, the lane is smoke-sweet and empty, save for blackened earth and 2 clean rut lines leading nowhere. Leaves hang in shreds. Steam threads the ditch. WWII lifts a hand toward the byre track Anke found, 1 sharp point, and the men shoulder what they can carry and step into the hedge's mouth.